right, we are live on YouTube. Beautiful. All right, we are live on Instagram as well. Welcome, welcome, my friends. Let's see. All right, perfect. Well, we'll get started. Hope you guys are having a great Monday. I wanted to jump on and talk about a topic that probably isn't going to get like a ton of views, but nonetheless is really, really important, especially if you've been diagnosed with some form of diabetes, whether it be type 1, type 2, maybe insulin resistance, prediabetes, hypoglycemia. It's a diagnosis of some sort, right? And it's especially in concert with you really working on your health, like really trying, you're eating healthy, you're staying active, you're taking supplements, you're doing tests, you're following social media accounts online, you're going to naturopaths or conventional doctors, like you're really putting in an effort, right? And yet you still get a diagnosis of that thing, right? And how invalidating that can be. And I know that firsthand because, back in 2017, I had just overcome a lot of things related to my health, whether that be, improving fatigue, whether that be anxiety or depression, or food sensitivities and allergies, and low testosterone and low thyroid. All these things have improved, and then I come on the other side of that, and then now I'm being diagnosed with type 1 diabetes, which just seemed to come out of the blue, right? And for many people that I chat with that connect with us, they often tend to be very, perfectionistic, which is a great quality to have because it means you really care about what you do, no matter what facet of life, and you're probably successful at whatever you put your mind to. And then when it comes to your health, it becomes very invalidating when you work directly in opposition to maybe a diagnosis that you received, and yet you get it anyways, right? And then what for me, I think too, and for many of our clients as well, they might compare themselves to maybe their friends or their family that maybe doesn't have as great of habits, right? They're not maybe eating as healthy, and maybe they're doing the exact habits that they personally feel set them up for having this diagnosis, and yet they have a swimming, a billing of health. They don't have any diagnosis. They're very healthy, right? At least on the outside, and yet here you are doing everything in your power, and yet you get that diagnosis. And so I think that can be extremely invalidating and almost make you feel like, why me, almost like a personal failure, so to speak. And I know that's how I felt, at least at the beginning as well, right? And I think it's so easy to stay in that place where you view, a diagnosis or progression of that to being a personal failure on your end. And it's a tough place to be. And I think if you don't have people around you that can kind of challenge that thought or challenge those things, I think it can be really tough not to stay in that position for a while. And we've worked with many clients and get on calls with people every single day, and some of them never quite accept that, right? So it's a challenging place to be, but I think it's really important to have people around you that are really supportive and can kind of help you get out of that space, because it's a choice to stay there. It's a choice to say, hey, you know, um, I have this diagnosis, and it's a personal failure on me. I have this diagnosis, and everything that I've worked for and did doesn't matter, right? And so I think where I like to look, and it was a little bit different situation for me than it is, for you guys, because I was in the health space. I was looking to, go as a professional in this space, right? And immediately after kind of processing the diagnosis, my mind quickly shifted into, okay, how can I use this to my advantage? Well, many professionals in my space, dietitians in my space, don't really have the condition that they're advising. And when I was in my internship, I saw that very clearly of like, it makes a difference when the someone who's advising you has personal experience. And I think the stereotypical example is, that was used in, the internship was someone that didn't have that experience, or was like someone that was wanting to lose weight, right? And yet the person advising them had never been overweight in their entire life, right? So, I get it on the client's end because I've seen it. I've seen it firsthand. So for me, that was the advantage. And it was like, wow, I can really use this. And this could really be a part of my story, not just in terms of career, but also in terms of maybe there are missing pieces that I'm not quite understanding about what it takes to be healthy. Maybe this thing will actually steer me in the right direction, not just career wise, but also with an approach to my health that maybe is a little bit more supportive. Because up until that point, it was really micromanagement by me. It was adding more and more and more things, learning more and more things without it really actually translating into really big results, right? I learned a lot. I gathered a lot of information, and I learned a lot of rules along the way, but it really didn't allow me to translate that into results. And for many people, it's more of the same as well. They learn a lot, they know a lot, they gather a lot of knowledge, but they don't quite translate that into things that move the needle for them. Or what ends up happening is ends up not being quite sustainable in the end, right? They cut out carbs, they cut out sugar, they cut out protein or fat or whatever the latest thing is to do for them, and it might maybe improve their health or blood sugar, whatever metric that they're trying to improve, but it comes at the expense of so many other things, right? And so how this diagnosis can kind of steer them in the right direction is it can say, hey, a lot of those things are really important to your overall health. Carbs are important to your overall health. Protein is important. Fat is important. All these are important. But the important thing is, okay, how do we make this work for you? Right? Because at the level of a diagnosis, it's less about, okay, how do I eat healthy? Because you're coming from that background already, right? And it's more about how can I eat healthy for me? How can I live healthy for me? And for myself, what I learned along the way is, yes, it's less about micromanaging. It's less about controlling to improve my health. It's less about really fixating and adding more and more things. And it's more about how can I bring more life back into my routines? How can I bring back more fun, more sustainability? And when I took that focus, well, yes, my blood sugar improved. I got my best A1C that I've ever had this year, 4.9, and that's while eating carbs. That's while not cutting out any particular foods, right? That's while, working less on my overall health, being less time consuming, right? I don't really even think about it. It's become so routine for me. And that's for all of our clients, it becomes that way. Versus where I was before, I was always having to think about it. I was always having to look up and Google and search and search and search and constantly worry and think about it. And it's coming from a place of fear. And what does that do? Well, that feeds right into the diagnosis that we probably have gotten, right? Because every time that someone has had a diabetes diagnosis, whether that be type 2, type 1, pre-diabetes, insulin resistance, it's always been, before that time, it's always been someone has gone through a very stressful period of time, always. Always, always. And, that's, big thing that we focus in on is, okay, what led up to your diagnosis? And always there's some sort of facet of that trauma, stress that we're not coping with quite well. And when we feed into that pathway because of our approach, well, we're basically feeding into the exact reason that we may have gotten that diagnosis, right? And so that's why I always say to our clients, the approach that you take with your health is just as important as the result that you want to get. Meaning we can't feed into the stress that we just, caused. We want to improve our body's ability to process stress and come up with an approach that, of course, is intentional, of course, gets us the results that we want, but do it in a non-stressful way, right? And that's what I really focused in on, and that's how all the symptoms really resolved, and that's how I got the best A1C that I've ever had, the 4.9. Really, I focused on those pieces instead of micromanaging, instead of doing more, and that's how all of our clients improve. They take the control out of it. They help their themselves to kind of see that middle ground instead of fixating and focusing. They live their lives again. And I think sometimes we need to be pushed in that direction because all these people that have more of these perfectionistic mentalities, which I am one of, and maybe you are one of too, they have such good intentions to support their health. And many times, so many people need that. So many people around the world need that type of mentality. But for you, it's a different message, right? Because you already have that mentality. And yet, you've gotten this diagnosis. And so it's kind of like, okay, what is missing? Well, it's not about trying hard because you've already really tried a heck of a lot. You've already done a lot. And so it's more about how can we be intentional with the right things, but also live our lives. Like health, our life isn't just about fixing on our health. And I'd argue that the more that we do that and go down the pathway of more and more and more and more, the more stressful that actually gets, right? So how can we find the middle ground? And ultimately, how can we find the silver lining, right? For me, it was my career and how much I would be able to speak to what people are experiencing because it's what I experience. Sorry, my phone um, went on low power mode. Um, what I was saying is, how can I see the silver lining? And for me, it was this is going to be my career, and it's going to be something I can speak to so much of a better degree because I have it. I go through it, and I can relate to someone on that level, not just from a textbook perspective, right? For you, it might be something different, but the more that you can see that silver lining, and more that you can see about this is something that has your best interest at heart. Maybe you can't see it right now, but think on that, ponder on that, because the more that you can see it from that perspective, the less stressful that this is going to be, and the faster that you'll get to the result that you want, right? So I hope that helps. I hope that brings you a kind of a new perspective around this because, like for me, and for many others, it's so easy to get trapped into that feeling of personal failure and shame and guilt and all the things that leads into that. Despite feeling like you've done everything that there is to do. So the more that we can live in that other universe of like, okay, what is good about this? What is good about what can come from working on this? A diagnosis can be one of the best blessings that you have, right? And it was for me. Awesome. Well, I hope that was helpful for you guys. We'll be on our next live tomorrow, same time, same place. I hope you guys have a wonderful Monday, and we'll talk to you guys soon.